Let's get everybody settled in here. We'll do lesson 9 and get on into 10 if we have time tonight. That's why I went ahead and put those out. It's part 1 and part 2 about angels in the Old Testament. So get settled in if you need a lesson. Anybody need a lesson? No, ma'am. Yeah, you need to do 8. It's a review of all everything we've already talked about. I told you that last week. Yeah, if I fooled you into doing lesson 8, that's good. I'll do that more often. Make y'all study more than you have to. All right. We're going to start with lesson 9, though, tonight. So, all right. I don't see any more movement back there. So, well, there's a little. Larry Stinson? Larry Stinson, would you lead us in prayer for a class?
Father, Heavenly, thank you for the day you blessed us with. This time we have to come together and study your word. And Father, we ask you to be with all those in our number that are sick and those that are mentioned, weak. Ask you to be with them and bless them as long as you can. And Father, we study, ask you to be with us, help us to find us through our lives to be better in the future than we were in the past. Just be with us, and you would bless us and forgive us our sins. In Jesus' name.
Amen. In our introductory remarks, we see that the word angel or angels is found well over 100 times in the Old Testament, mostly in Judges and then in the prophet Zechariah. 195 times he says in the New Testament. Again, that may depend on which version of the Bible you're reading, mostly in Matthew and Revelation. The Hebrew word malek is from the root to dispatch as a deputy or a messenger. And keep that in mind, because there's going to be a lot of questions that just simply can't be answered about angels. But keep in mind that an angel is an agent or a messenger of God. Okay? There's the Greek word, angelos. I guess that's the proper pronunciation, or at least it is going to be for us. It's a messenger, envoy, one who is sent, an angel, a messenger from God, and that's from Thayers. All right. So these words normally refer to a spirit being living in the spiritual realm who God sent to do a special task or to send a special message. There are some passages listed there in the end of your introductory comments. However, these don't necessarily mean angels. In one case, he references scriptures talking about John the Baptist, and another, the James chapter 2, that's talking about the 2 spies that Rahab hid. Those weren't angels. They were just regular people. And so I'm not sure why he included those passages in your notes there. So we begin talking about the position and nature of angels, and we begin in Hebrews, of all places, since we're talking about the Old Testament. We're going to start in the New Testament. So in Hebrews chapter 1, verses 6 through 9, it does tell us a little bit about the position and nature of angels. In Hebrews chapter 1, verse 6 through 9, probably won't read it all, but verse 6 says, when he, again, brings the firstborn into the world, he says, let all the angels of God worship him. And of the angels, he says, who makes his angels spirits and his ministers a flame of fire. But to the Son, he says, your throne, O God, is forever and ever. A scepter of righteousness is a scepter of your kingdom. And we'll stop right there. The question's been asked, what position do angels hold in relationship to Jesus Christ? Well, we see right here that he says that all the angels of God worshiped him. So that tells you their position just right away. Now, if you jump down to verse 9, you see something very interesting. where it says that therefore God, your God, has anointed you with the oil of gladness more than your companions. And what that means is God has anointed Christ more than his angelic companions or spiritual companions, okay, in comparison to verse 6 there that says the angels worshipped him. 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 22, and you can jot that down if you want to. 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 22 says that Christ has gone into heaven and is at right hand of God, angels, authorities, powers having been made subject to him. Now, verse 7 and verses 8 and 9 from this passage are quoted from the Psalms. Psalm 104, verse 4, Psalm 45, verses 6 and 7. And so we see right away that the Hebrew writer makes the distinction between Jesus Christ and the angels who are under Jesus Christ. Hebrews chapter 1, verse 4, if you back up just a little bit, having become so much better than angels, as he has an inheritance obtained a more excellent name than these. So if Jesus is sitting on the right hand of God, what does that tell us? You have to know a little bit about the right hand, but what does that tell us? What in biblical times, what was sitting at the right hand? What does that mean? An honorable place. Okay, so Christ is at the right hand of God. Now we know that there's God and there's Christ and there's angels, so where do we fit in? Hebrews chapter 2, verses 6 through 8. Hebrews chapter 2, verses 6 through 8. But one testified in a certain place, saying, what is man, that you are mindful of him? Or the Son of Man, that you take care of him? You have made him a little lower than the angels. You have crowned him with glory and honor, and set him over the works of your hands. You have put all things in subjection under his feet. For in that he put all subjection under him. He left nothing that is not put under him. But now we do not yet see all things put under him. So what does this say? What's our position in the grand scheme of things? Lower than the angels. However, in that same passage, the Hebrew writer, and by the way, this is also quoted from the book of Psalms, Psalm chapter 8, verses 4 through 6. And so that would mean that we're down here, if you go over that hierarchy, God, Christ, angels, us, okay? And however, in that passage, what does the Hebrew writer say about us? What has God given us to do? What has he given us? Subject over everything on the earth. All right? Pretty important job. Pretty important job. All right? You see that there in verse 7 that we have honor and glory, and we have been set over the works of God's hands. Put all things under subjection. And so, pretty important job. Pretty important job. And perhaps you've heard someone say that God has given us to be what? The caretakers or stewards over the earth. Okay? Over the earth. And so now we've established that angels are somewhere between Jesus Christ and us. Okay? All right.
I would say that a lot of people, Mother Earth, and we're like little parasites roaming Mother Earth.
Yeah.
And in fact, several instances, and I think I quoted one or two of them in my devotional a few weeks ago, but we're put here to have dominion.
Right.
Words. We're in charge of the earth. It's not like the earth tells us what to do. We tell the earth what to do.
Right. And we are to be good to stewards and use it wisely. And what happens when we use the earth wisely? We benefit, right? We benefit. All right? And I don't want to get on my soapbox. But you know, if I take a bike ride and I go down to the lake or somewhere down there and down by the boat ramp, and it looks like a dump, that just aggravates me to death. It just aggravates me to death. Because that's not being a good steward of the earth. So anyway, I'll get off that. All right. Are angels physical or spiritual beings? Well, that's kind of a silly question, isn't it? Which are they? It is interesting, though, as we study some instances of angels in the Old Testament, we're going to see some characteristics that seem unusual for a spiritual being. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Let's look at this passage, Luke chapter 2, and then Genesis chapter 19, 1 and following. Okay, so we'll begin to see some of these things that might make us wonder or might make us answer a question, ask a question or two. All right, Luke chapter 2. And so this is the birth of Jesus, the story of the birth of Jesus. And suddenly there was with the angel a multitude of heavenly hosts praising God and saying, Glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace, goodwill toward men. So it was, when the angels had gone away from them into heaven, that the shepherds said to one another, Let us go to Bethlehem and see this thing that come to pass, which the Lord has made known to us. A couple of things to notice here. Suddenly there was with an angel a multitude of heavenly hosts. Where did they go when they got through praising? It says that they went into heaven. That's exactly right. Went into heaven. So we know that a physical being couldn't do that, right? So they're spiritual beings. They're spiritual beings. Now here's something interesting, though. From this story, we go all the way to Genesis. Genesis chapter 19, the story of Lot. And so Genesis chapter 19, beginning at verse 1, we're not going to read that whole passage, but we're going to kind of jump around and look at some of the verses, and I'll let you answer some questions. Okay? Verse 1 says, Now the two angels came to Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting at the gate of Sodom. When Lot saw them, he rose to meet them, and he bowed himself with his face toward the ground. You reckon them guys said, We're angels? How'd Lot know that they were angels? Saw these two fellas coming. Huh? Okay. And so if we keep reading, there's some things. Now, you guys told me just a minute ago that angels are spiritual beings, right? Right? Verse 2 said, Lot said, Wash your feet and spend the night and rise early. So, does a spiritual being get his feet dirty? We don't know. Well, I guess they did in this instance because, or that was just common practice when a visitor came, he said, wash your feet. Okay, keep that in mind too. All right. That's physical. Okay, hang on. Hang on. Then, the Bible says in verse 3, Lot prepared a meal for them and they ate. Oh, that's physical. So that kind of tells us a little bit about the ability, okay, and the presentation of angels, okay. There are going to be cases that we look at in these examples in which they do physical things, they do human things. For instance, like here, they ate supper, okay, they ate supper, all right. It says then they took Lot. This is verse 16, I'm sorry, if you're following along in your Bible. So then in verse 16, it says they took Lot, his wife, and daughters by the hand and led them out of the city. Okay? So there was physical contact. Physical contact. So those are some examples. We're going to look at a few more too. Okay? A few more. And again, I apologize for these lessons. The questions are, in my opinion, jumbled up where they don't make I don't know, chronological sense at least in my opinion, because later on in the lesson we'll go back to a similar question like this. Okay? So now we're going to jump off and talk about the personalities of angels. Okay? Personalities of angels. So keep those things that we just talked about in mind, because we'll visit those things again later in another story, Old Testament story. And so again from Luke chapter 26. By the way, why would he keep, these are angels in the Old Testament, why would he keep going back to the New Testament, to the Gospels? Well, we don't need those angels, that's true, but what dispensation did the Gospels take place in? It's still the Mosaic Law during that time, isn't it? So it's really still during Old Testament times, right? Okay, so that's why we're spending a little bit of time in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Right. So there are information for us about the Old Testament in Hebrews. So that's why we're spending time there too. Good point, Ken. All right. So how about personalities? Luke chapter 1, verse 26. Now in the 6th month, the angel Gabriel was sent by God to the city of Galilee named Nazareth. All right. So do they have individual personalities? Apparently they have individual names, or at least this one angel has a name, Gabriel, right? And so this name also appears 2 times in the book of Daniel, and then twice in Luke chapter 1. Luke chapter 1, verse 19, the angel answered and said, I am Gabriel, who stands in the presence of God, and was sent to speak to you and bring glad tidings. And so he was going to tell them about the coming Christ, okay, the birth of Jesus. All right. So now we have these spiritual beings that sometimes do physical things. They have names, and now are they all the same, or is one more important than the other? Is a question we're going to look at. 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. Right. Right. When he told Zechariah, he said, hey, you know, you're right. That's right. But he did have that authority. He had that authority to tell him. Okay, 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verse 16. Talking about the second coming. For the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of an archangel, and with the trumpet of God. And the dead in Christ will rise first. I look at the language of this verse, and it says, with the voice of an archangel. It doesn't say the voice of a particular archangel, okay? So I'm just curious. And the Greek word here, they tell us, means chief angel, archangel. That's what it means in the Greek. How, at least all the ones that God sends to do certain things. Because we're going to look at the angels that talked to Gideon. We're going to look at the angel that had the wrestling match with Jacob. We're going to look at Moses in the burning bush. We're going to look at all these instances where angels were doing what God wanted them to do. They were acting in his stead. So they would have that authority, that God-given authority. All right. And so Jude 9 actually does name an archangel. Jude 9. And I think we've looked at this verse back in our study on the devil. Okay. Jude 9. Yet Michael the archangel, in continuing with the devil, when he disputed about the body of Moses, dared not bring against him a railing accusation, said, "The Lord rebuke you." And so he had the power to rebuke and authority to rebuke Satan. Okay? He's named in another passage in Revelation chapter 12, where it says that Michael and his angels fought against the dragon. And who is the dragon in Revelation? Satan, the old devil, Satan. And if you do look up in the dictionaries and the commentaries and the lexicons and all those books, they do say that archangel means head angel. So if we pay attention to those, then there perhaps is a rank, all right, of angels. Now, number 6, and this is going to be an interesting question for us, because the question is asked, are angels married, and why or why not? Now, I know y'all all familiar with the story of Matthew chapter 22, right? In Matthew chapter 22, the Sadducees come to Jesus, and so they give him a scenario, okay? So, Matthew chapter 22. They give him this scenario concerning widows and the law of Moses. So, in the law of Moses, if something happened to me, and I have brothers, something happened to me, then my brother could take Miss Janet as his wife. That was the law of Moses. So the Sadducees, they're going to test Jesus, right? So they say, okay, first husband dies, second brother gets it. Second brother dies, third brother gets it. And they do this and say 7 brothers had this one woman as her wife. Now, why would the Sadducees ask a question about the resurrection? That's exactly right, Mary. They believe in the resurrection. So they were trying Jesus, okay? So we'll just ask them a trick question about the resurrection. And, you know, I can kind of imagine these fellows sitting around trying to figure out and figure out this scenario that say, ain't no way this guy can answer this. Well, what did he say? Look at Matthew chapter 22 and verse 30. Matthew chapter 22 and verse 30. Jesus said, y'all don't know what you're talking about. For in the resurrection they neither marry nor are given in marriage. Why is that? Because they are like angels of God in heaven. Okay? No marriage in heaven. Now, a little side note. My dad and I had a little conversation last week, and he asked me a question about this, kind of, sort of, and it was something for me to think about. In heaven, will there be personal reunions? You hear people say all the time that, well, now so-and-so has passed, now they're having a great reunion in heaven or in paradise, whichever the case may be. It's not going to be the same kind, is it, Kenneth? Not going to be the same kind. And so this verse right here tells us that the relationships that we have on earth are not the same in the spiritual realm. They're not the same. Now, will we recognize each other? I would say, yeah, because you think about the story in Luke chapter 16 about Lazarus and the rich man. When the rich man died and went to torment, and he looked up at Abraham's bosom, who did he see? He saw the beggar, right? He saw Lazarus. He recognized Lazarus. And the Bible actually says in verses 23 and 24 of that chapter, he calls Lazarus by name. So there is recognition. We will know each other, okay? We will know each other. But as far as the earthly relationships that we have, they're going to be different some way. I don't know exactly how, but Jesus here said that, you know, Miss Janet and I aren't going to be married in heaven. We're just not. The relationship's going to be different some way. Okay, we're going to be like the angels. And He did. He mentioned his brothers, and so that recognition is still there. But the relationship somehow is going to be changed. I'm not sure, and I don't have all the answers to that either. I'm still watering that around myself. And but no, I don't think he did he? No, because he said they can't get to each other because there's a great gulf between them. Okay, so maybe there's no communication, and
Well, you know, they were in torment, and he was in
paradise.
And so there's still torment going on. He's looking down and he's just tormenting over his brothers and whatever.
Oh yeah,
And Lazarus, he's just
He's-
having
he's in paradise with Abraham.
not feeling all that pain.
Right, right. So now to get back to our study, spiritual beings, angels, don't have the same kind of relationships that we do. They're not, as Jesus said, they're not married. Okay, they don't have those relationships. It's a physical. Right, it's going to be spiritual. Okay, all right. Now, in the next section, how much time we got? Just a few minutes. In the next section, there are two types of spiritual beings mentioned. All right, in Genesis chapter 3, verse 24, when God drove man out of the garden, I'll let y'all get there. I hear your pages turning. Genesis chapter 3, verse 24. And so this is after man has sinned, and God is driving Adam and Eve out of the garden. And after he drove them out of the garden, it says that he placed a cherubim at the east of the Garden of Eden, and a flaming sword which turned every way to guard the way to the tree of life. So we're introduced in Genesis chapter 3 of a being, an angel, if you will, a cherubim. Okay. Isaiah called, when he was called to be God's prophet, he sees a vision of a cherubim. Okay. It's a plural noun, is what they say. If you look up the meaning, and a cherubim is a winged angelic being described in biblical tradition as attending on God or waiting on God. Now, this is interesting because you know how we're influenced by culture and popular beliefs. What does Valentine look like? A cherubim with a bow and arrow, a chubby little healthy-looking child with wings. Right? We've all seen the pictures, you know, and so that's man-made. There's nothing to base that on. So there's a cherubim. And then secondly, from Isaiah chapter 6, verse 2, what would the other, a seraphim. Okay, a seraphim. That's from Isaiah chapter 6, verse 2. Above it stood a seraphim, and it had 6 wings. With 2 he covered his face, with 2 he covered the feet, and with 2 he flew. I meant to look this up. Which was on top of the ark? Was it cherubim on top of the ark of the covenant? Facing each other with the wings? I should have looked that up. Okay? All right. So the text describes a seraphim as a winged celestial being, spiritual being with fiery passion doing God's good work. Okay, in Revelation chapter 4, verse 6, chapter 4, verse 6, they are called living creatures. Living creatures. Okay? All right? So in the midst of the throne and around the throne were four living creatures full of eyes in front and back. When the Bible describes spiritual things, what does God use to describe spiritual things? I'm sorry. What type of description does he use? Physical, something we can understand. Okay? So I want you to keep that in mind as you think about angels and wings and six eyes and all these things. Keep that in mind, that these are spiritual beings. That God, perhaps, in His wisdom, described these things where we could understand them. Not that that's literally what they look like. It's probably not. An angel probably may not even have wings, but something that we would describe as wings. Or perhaps... Right. Right. It's spiritual, right? Streets of gold in heaven. They're not really gold, but God uses those physical things, those precious things, precious jewels to describe things in heaven so we can understand it and comprehend it. It's highly likely if we actually knew the spiritual description of an angel, we couldn't comprehend it. We just couldn't. We wouldn't understand it. Yes, sir? It was spooky looking. It wasn't a good-looking fellow with some nice white wings spread out. No, it wasn't. It made a mule lay down for sure. Match his master's leg on the wall. And so just keep that in mind as we study these things. The things that we read out in the Bible, God has given us descriptions where we can understand them. We can understand them. And as we look at some other stories, for instance, like the burning bush, why do you suppose God used a burning bush? So, because we know what it looks like, don't we? We know what a bush looks like, and we know what a bush on fire looks like. You know, we've all burned brush and those sort of things. So God uses those things to help us. It wasn't being consumed, so it was something spiritual about that, wasn't it? That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Now, in the second section of your lesson, we really get down to the purpose of angels, and they are the messengers of God. We can quit right here and say, okay, what's an angel? It's a messenger of God. He does what God tells him to, and we can read in the Old Testament and see all kinds of things that angels did, and so that's an angel's job. All right. Genesis chapter 19, we go back to that we talked about a little bit ago. We won't spend any more time there, but we saw some things that the angels did, right? They interacted with Lot. Lot served them. They did some physical things that's kind of a mystery to us. But also they carried out God's judgment in certain cases. All right? Think about the plagues in Egypt. Man, we're already done? Okay. All right. Psalm 78. Psalm 78. Interesting place to learn what angels did during the plagues, I think. All right. Psalm 78, verse 43 through 51. We're not, because of time, we're not going to look at all those. We'll paraphrase a little bit. We'll look at verse 49. Psalm 78, verse 49 says, He cast on them the fierceness of His anger, wrath, indignation, and trouble. How did He do it? By sending angels of destruction among them. Okay? These are His servants, His messengers. Okay? So those plagues in verse 43 through 48 in that passage, some of the plagues are described. You know, it's interesting that King James Version of the Bible calls these evil angels. Evil angels because they were apparently carrying out the plagues. If you're reading the ESV, it will say there's a band of destroying angels. Also, the American Standard does as well. So what it does, it indicates that the angels had a hand in these plagues, okay, in helping bring these plagues. Of course, the final plague, what was the final plague? Plague number 10. The death of the firstborn. That's exactly right, Cindy. Death of the firstborn. Okay? So it is interesting here. And we look in the New Testament, 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 10, where it says that the Lord will pass through and strike the Egyptians, and when he sees the blood on the lintel and on the two doorposts, the Lord will pass over the door and not allow the destroyer to come into your houses to strike you. So if you look back to Exodus chapter 12, you'll see that term destroyer used again. I've heard people call him the death angel, when the death angel passed over. Okay, I've heard that term used. All right. So angels in this instance served God by the plagues. Okay. But angels also in the Old Testament protected God's people. They protected God's people. Exodus chapter 14 and Exodus chapter 23. Exodus chapter 14, let's see, verse 19. And the angel of God, who went before the camp of Israel, moved and went behind them. And the pillar of cloud went from before them and stood behind them. So it came between the camp and the Egyptians and the camp of Israel. I always thought about that because they were so close to each other they could see each other. You know, so why didn't them Egyptians, they didn't just come and jump all over them then? Well, angel God was there helping in that situation. So there was protection given by an angel. Okay. In Exodus chapter 23, verse 20, behold, I send an angel before you to keep you in the way and to bring you into place which I have prepared. So this angel was given the charge to protect and guide the children of Israel. Okay? So that was one purpose that the angels served. Now, we're out of time, aren't we? The next section, and again, this is something that I've already talked about a little bit, is that the role that angels played or angel played in the giving of the law. In the giving of the law. And I have some questions myself that I haven't been able to answer about that too. So maybe I just need to dig around and do some more studying about that. So let's quit there. We'll mark that. And I'm sorry. We were almost through, weren't we? Almost through. So, but we'll tackle that next time and move right on in to the second part in lesson 10. And again, we'll continue to talk about the role of angels and look at some more stories as well. All right? Okay.
right, everybody. Appreciate you being here tonight. I haven't had any announcements that were revised or added to today. Let's see. Pantry Out of Steel Salsa. May the 5th, we're honoring our graduates. May the 19th, we're having a men's Bible study and breakfast. Sympathies go out to all those that have lost loved ones. Think about Calvin, the whole Fredman family. Debbie has an appointment now. Miss Lottie, Miss Linda, Alton, Jim, and Leslie. Let's see. My mother is still not doing well at all, so please remember her. Let's see, this is the 24th. Tomorrow, Alton has a birthday. The 27th, Jolie has a birthday. Is there any other birthdays or announcements that need to be made? All right, guess what? I get to do y'all's Devo again tonight. But before I do, I got to tell you a cool story. I have succumbed to temptation. For weeks, months, maybe years, I've been lusting for a store-bought haircut. So yesterday evening on the way home, I whooped in the barber shop. I guess my barber was in there watching Fox News or something because I had to wait on him to come out for a little bit. But I sat out in that chair. He said, "What can I do for you, James Roy?" And I said, "Well, I'm torn between a mullet and a mohawk." He had a talk with me about limitations. So I said, "Well, just take the guard off them shears and peel it down." He said, "I call that a Larry Stinson." I want to talk to you tonight about something that spawned over our Bible study we have on Sunday morning. I mentioned when we first started talking about the Bible and how it became a book and all the great things about it, that I was told by someone very, very early in my life, I don't think I was 20 years old, "James, I believe in God, but I'm just not so sure about the Bible." I was blown away by that, and I was unable to answer that without being sarcastic. I can be sarcastic if I need to, believe it or not, but I got it in my mind just recently that I would put a better answer together about the Word being truth. First of all, I'm just going to run a few scriptures by you. 2 Timothy 3:16, all scripture is God-breathed, profitable for teaching, reproof, correction, and training in righteousness. 2 Peter 1, no prophecy was ever produced by the will of man, but spoke from God as carried by the Holy Spirit. John 16:13, when the Spirit of truth comes, He will guide you into all truth. Moving over to John 17, sanctify them in truth. Your word is truth. "66 books in here. The pen in 40 different people's hand over a period of somewhere around 1,500 years with a 400-year gap in the middle. The thing fits like a glove and never contradicts itself one time." History lesson. Anybody in here know who Chuck Colson was? I need Mike in here bad for this. Chuck Colson was a special advisor for Richard Nixon. For you young people in here, Richard Nixon was our president that got impeached in the early 70s, probably around 72, I would think. somewhere between Chuck Colson being found out and going to prison, the story says he was saved, and he did a lot of prison ministry after that. I have no idea that story, but that's how the story goes. But I read a quote of his that I thought resonated with me, and I hope will resonate with you. Chuck Colson said, when he started studying the New Testament, after the persecution in Jerusalem after Pentecost, Jesus' apostles and their disciples were scattered all over everywhere. And through horrific persecution, separation by land, right up until almost all of them's being killed for the cause of Christ, they kept their story exactly the same. They kept the word exactly the same. They told the same story exactly the same. He said there was 7 of us in Watergate and we couldn't keep a lie straight for 3 weeks. There is no way that this book is not true. I'm going to finish with John chapter 8. If you abide in my word, you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. So until we know the truth and obey the truth, we are enslaved to sin. The truth will set us free. There is a pile of people in this room. If you need some help finding the truth, we'll study together and learn together at whenever and however you want. If you have any need, as Jay always says, you can come right now. You can call us, you can text us, you can come see us. It does not matter. If you have any need, let us know. Sam, the invitation song's 592. 592. What will you do with Jesus? Look where